again, thank you everybody and welcome to April's Tenant Talk Live. My name is Sid Betancourt and I am a project manager for inclusive community engagement at the coalition, and I use she, they pronouns. And for anybody who is new to this or needs a refresher, Tenant Talk Live really is just here to provide connections, or here to help you connect with one another, but to also help you learn best practices for federal housing advocacy, and how to lead it within your communities as well. So as you might have just heard a second ago, this meeting is being recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube afterwards. And today's guest, Mindy Woods, is joining us from the state of Washington to talk about some of their legislative advocacy this year. But before I pass it over to Mindy, I'll just do some brief logistics, and then Mindy will do her presentation, and then I'll do some policy updates towards the end of the call. But I will begin by sharing our community agreements for the year. Okay. Awesome. So on the screen, you should be able to see them now. Again, just plant number will treat others the way they want to be treated. In other words, please consider how you want to be treated might differ from how other folks might want to be treated. Since we're like in an open forum space, we want to make sure that we're able to hear everyone. So mute your mic except when speaking. Listen with an open mind and empathy, taking up space and giving space to others. And lastly, again, just a reminder that this is being recorded and will be shared online afterwards. And if y'all have any questions, or if you want to provide additional feedback on those, please feel free to email me at sbetancourt@nlhc.org. And I think Courtney just dropped that in the chat. And then everything that is shared during today's call will be included in a follow-up email that goes out every Friday in our e-blast called The Connection. You all should be signed up for that email, but if you don't get it, definitely check your spam. But if you can't find it in your spam, please feel free to reach out to me or sign up again for our emails with the link that Courtney just put in the chat. And we'll also be sharing the recap of last month's materials. So if you didn't catch March's Tenant Talk Live, we'll have that in the chat for you all. And yeah, I guess I'll just cut it short there so that we can make sure that Mindy has time to go over the presentation, and we have some time for questions. But I want to go ahead and introduce Mindy Woods, who is a Desert Storm Navy veteran and a single mother. She is a founding member of Washington State's Resident Action Project, which is a statewide resident-led network of people who have experienced housing insecurity and injustice, and they organize and use civic engagement, education, and storytelling to bring about policy change. So Mindy, I'll pass it over to you, and I'll start sharing my screen in a second as well.
Great, thank you, Sid. Hi, everybody. I'm Mindy Woods. As Sid said, she, her pronouns. I am in the beautiful state of Washington, just north of Seattle, about 15 minutes in Edmonds, in Snohomish County. And as Sid said, I have served in the U.S. Navy. I was in Desert Storm, single mom, and 13 years ago, right about this time of year, right about this time of year, my son and I were experiencing black mold. It was taking over our apartment, and my son ended up in our local children's hospital for 4 days with mold growing in his esophagus. And at that point, my landlord was trying to cover it up and do all kinds of shady stuff. So we ended up having to evacuate in lieu of being evicted. And so that was our first time experiencing homelessness. And then it happened again 9 years ago, when a landlord was discriminately kind of picking off the single moms that came out of the shelter program that we had been in, that had housed us. And she was just either, evicting people or just did not renew their lease. And that's what happened to us. We just got our state had a 20-day written notice at that time. And 20 days, as you all know, is not long enough to do anything, let alone try to find a new place, find a place that accepts the Section 8 voucher, gather up all the money, get help to help you move, pack like all the things. And so we ended up homeless a second time. So that's what led me to advocacy. I was staying in a YWCA shelter, and somebody came in and said there was a bill in our legislature that if it had sunsetted or ended, then it would have reduced the amount of money that would have gone to shelters across our state by 70%. And that definitely would have affected the shelter we were in. And so they asked, would anybody be willing to go down and just talk for 3 minutes? And so me being a talker, and a ticked off mama bear at that point, I was like, absolutely, let me go tell them for 3 minutes why they need to pass this legislation to make sure that no shelter was affected. And so that led me to the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. And after I testified that very first time, the policy director was there and pulled me aside and said, we have this amazing group of tenants who have come together. And at that time, we had a different class that taught us Advocacy 101. And from there, that led to the birth of the Washington Resident Action Project, and in partnership with Community Change. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But they helped us bring us all together, people from across the state who had all experienced housing insecurity, instability, injustice, homelessness, all of it. And we use our stories to impact policy change by educating folks, civic engagement, and just making those changes that we need to make. And, we always say that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but often lack the power, resource, influence, just the seat at the table. And so that's what we're doing. We are definitely lengthening the table and making seats at the table for ourselves. So we are getting those policies changed one by one. And so this past legislative session, we had some victories, but I think all eyes were on us across the country. We were really pushing for statewide rent stabilization, not rent control, but stabilization. So, and I'll go into that in a little bit, but we had lots of people across the state. We really work hard to bring in others. And really there isn't anybody that isn't affected by housing. Housing is, like air, food, and water. It is a basic necessity, and it is very difficult to do anything else without a safe, stable, healthy, and accessible place to call home. And so we bring in lots of partners, and we're constantly assessing and looking at who's not with us, who has not been brought into the fold. So you'll see on this slide, this picture is our annual Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day. It's our big day down at our Capitol. We had over 720 people registered and over 500 that were able to make the trip. And you'll see different groups in their different colors. So lots of different organizations, from healthcare to education to workforce, faith-based organizations, just everybody. And bring everybody coming together, and then we break into groups within our legislative districts and then go and talk with our legislators. So go ahead and next slide. And so then what we do is we break into our groups and we go and meet with our legislators, and we have about 15 minutes because they're right in the middle of legislative session. We in our state are a part-time legislature, so on even years like this year, we have a short session, so only 60 days. It's a very short period of time to get everything done. And then on the alternate years, we have the long legislation, which is 105 days. So this year, we knew rent stabilization was going to be our big, number one thing that we were going to work on. So we bring together our advocates, we have talking points, we do lots of sessions before we even get down there to teach people what's going on. This is where things are. These are the legislators that are kind of leaning this way. Here's legislators that are leaning that way. Here's who we need to talk with and work on. So, by the time we get into those 15-minute meetings, we're pretty dialed in, and we know exactly who's going to talk about what thing. We identify within our legislative district groups, who has experienced rent instability or an excessive rent increase, who has experienced homelessness, who has lived in a property that benefited from housing trust fund dollars. So some of the different key points that we're working on, we identify somebody in the group that's going to talk for a couple of minutes so that we really nail down our legislative priorities for that 15-minute time period. Go ahead, next slide, please. And so we have lots of allies, including local elected officials. And, you know, I can't say enough about our local elected officials, as well as our some of our different groups that have really stepped up and testified time and time again. I testified a few times this year. I have a full-time job and I work for the city that I live in. So sometimes it's hard to be able to, you know, jump in for a hearing, and especially when you get, you know, 1,000 people that sign in for the hearing. Those hearings can last 4 or 5 hours long or longer. So very, very grateful for so many more partners. So we've got some really progressive landlords that have been, I mean, unbelievable. Their testimonies are so on point and have really helped to guide our legislators and educate them. We've got some amazing council members that you can see on that slide, and lots of different individuals that have really gone above and beyond and really have, this has kind of been their life work, you know, during the legislative session. So super, super grateful to those folks. Go ahead, next slide, please. Okay, so in this slide, you will see some of these were our 4 key priorities for the 2024 legislative session. And again, our number 1 focus was rent stabilization. And it's just to end the excessive rent increases. In the work that I do now in the city that I live in, I'm in human services, and I serve a city of about 43,000 people. I have had so many stories of rent increases that are absolutely gut-wrenching. $700 a month, $500 a month, you know, even $100 a month for many people is just enough to tilt them right over the edge of the financial cliff. So we were really looking at how could we stabilize those increases within a 12-month period. So we started out with a 5% increase cap over a 12-month period, and then it got amended to a 7% increase cap. And when I went back and looked at my own rent increases over the last 8 years that I've been in my apartment, my landlord has only raised my rent 5% each year. And that is relatively doable. Certainly not for everybody. There are many people who are already rent burdened, so they're spending more than 30% of their total income on their rent and utilities, which is what the Fair Housing Act says is what's acceptable. So, you know, like I said, for some people, $25 was more than they could bear. But for most people, and in the data and the research found that 5% was something that many people could, you know, deal with. Sid, I just saw yours 10%. Yeah, I mean, landlords are doing it all over. But I got one particular call that has kept me awake every night. I think about this. A man in his 40s on Social Security disability. He is the sole caretaker for his mom, who is terminally ill with cancer, also on Social Security disability. So they're bringing in just under $2,000 together, living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and they got a $700 a month increase. And that's on top of the $1,600 plus that they were already paying. So there's just no way. And the man called me absolutely in tears. And he ended up having to put his mom in a rehab facility for a week. And then there was a 1-bedroom that became available in their apartment complex. So he hand carried everything over to the 1-bedroom during that week, set everything up, brought his mom home. She has the bedroom where she will spend her end days, and he's out on the couch. Now, the really, really sad thing about this scenario, in addition to losing his mom, is that once she passes, he will be down to that sole income, and that will not be enough to cover a 1-bedroom. So he will be facing homelessness again unless he can find something that is affordable within his Social Security disability income. So I'm just, every day I think about this particular family, and there's families all across the country that are experiencing situations like this. So rent stabilization, this was our House Bill 21114. There was a Senate companion bill. The Senate bill did not move forward, died in the Senate, but the House bill moved forward. And the really cool thing is the House bill, then once it passed the House, it needed to go over to the Senate. And Senate leadership in the Ways and Means Committee, which is kind of the head committee, was able to pull that bill and bypass the Senate Housing Committee and pull it straight up to Ways and Means. So we were really, really hopeful that we were going, that this had some great traction. It was talked about so much in the legislature. It was on the news every day. We had so many people commenting, or calling in and sending in letters of support, signing in pro for this bill. But once it got to Ways and Means on for that vote, we had two particular senators that kind of flipped on us and it died. But we don't say that it died, even though I just said that. It did not die. It's just in hibernation. So it's hibernation for this year. We are going to pass this. We're going to get this across the finish line next legislative session. We are already organizing. We have groups all over the state who are already meeting with their legislators during the interim session, the off time. We're already, there's already letters to the editor, op-eds, all kinds of movement on this. So it is just dormant for this year. We will get this done, guaranteed. We had some great legislative champions that really, really went out there and pushed for this. And so, like I said, we've got some great momentum on this, and it is not going to pass. I mean, it's not going to die down. We're going to continue this. And especially as, the grants pass ruling, that I'm sure that NLHC has talked about that, but the Martin versus Boise ruling that guarantees that unhoused people cannot be moved if there is not an adequate shelter that the local jurisdiction can provide for an individual. There's a lot of different things that are going on right now. So I think, this year is going to be really, really tough, and is certainly in a presidential election year. Housing, President Biden talked about this in the State of the Union address. I mean, housing is the big topic on everybody's lips right now. So this is going to come back stronger than ever as we go into the next legislative session next January. Another thing that we were really pushing for was the Affordable Homes Act. This was House Bill 2276 and Senate Bill 6191. This was a bill that would have created a sustainable source of income for the Housing Trust Fund, but also would have helped to strengthen permanent supportive housing for folks with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. And sadly, the representative who sponsored this bill, Representative April Berg, this died on her birthday. So it was just an extra salt in the wound. But again, this too, I think we've got a lot of momentum on this. We will get this forward at some point. And we often have to remind ourselves, this work is not a sprint. And even, at the Housing Forum, I heard the term, it's not a marathon, it's a relay. So it is long-term. We keep going. Sometimes we have to tap out and take a rest, take a breather. Then you tap back in and you join the fight again. But the average, at least in our state, it is 3 years that a bill, from the time the bill is introduced till the time that it is passed. So 3 different legislative sessions to get a bill across the finish line. So, we're not giving up. This is, we're in for the long haul. This is what we do with Resident Action Project. We just keep, we recharge, re-energize, learn from others, find maybe there's other tweaks and other things that we can change up during the interim session and come back stronger than ever. Another thing that we wanted to do was enact a progressive revenue and protect Washington's consumers. So the Gift Card Accountability Act. It did not pass, but we got some really good movement on that one as well. so gift cards, once they're purchased, the corporation has made their money, but oftentimes gift cards go unused. I just found 3 in my wallet that I totally forgot I had. And I'm sure that's many of us that go through that. And so being able to then take those unused gift cards and put them back into our state's general budget to go towards affordable housing or housing homeless services was something that it was new, it was a new concept, but we got a lot of movement. We had a lot of great partner organizations that jumped in on this, that were really working together as a coalition. So that is something that we will definitely bring back as well. And then the fourth big priority that we were working on as our legislative priorities was the Consumer Protection Act. Yeah, that was another one. So backfilling our state's document recording fee. So a document recording fee during certain real estate transactions, there is $100 fee that goes towards affordable housing and services and programs related to homelessness and homelessness prevention. And a couple of years ago, there was predictions with our very hot housing market of, this is how much money we expect for this to bring in. Well, then last summer, the housing market really slowed down. In my county alone, we were down 36% in our real estate transactions. So that brought up that there was this roughly $68 million shortfall in this whole prediction and the funding for this for these services. And so we weren't asking for more money, we were needing to backfill that shortfall. And so we were able to get just under $60 million. And then they actually, the week before this went through, before the budgets were released, they actually recalculated things and found that things were not as bad as we thought. So we got exact, somebody's got their mic on, so I started to hear a echo. Anyway, we got what we actually needed. We found that instead of 70 million, it was about 60 million. So that was great. So that will it's not more money, it's just going to fill in what we had already predicted that we would need moving forward. And then investing in affordable homes, we were able to get 127,539 million new dollars. I said that wrong. That were invested in affordable homes through the Housing Trust Fund. And the Housing Trust Fund is what helps, all of our affordable housing developers build these projects. So, and that adds to the record $400 million that we got in our capital budget last year. So huge investment in the Housing Trust Fund. So, like I said, we had a mixed bag year of some positives, but when it came to the very thing that would have prevented homelessness, that rent stabilization, that was the big letdown. But it is dormant, like I said. We will get it again going forward. I just want to touch base real quick on, so how do we organize? So we start now. Legislative session just ended a few weeks ago. The Housing Alliance took a week off last week. Many of us were out there. Some of us were at the Housing Forum in DC with the NLIHC the week before. And so, we take a little breather, but we are already gearing up. I already have meetings. I've already had one this past week. I've got another one coming up. So we are already in our legislative districts starting to organize. And we're calling those meetings with our legislators, and we're bringing forward these stories of rent increases, these stories of homelessness, these stories of tried to get into a shelter and they were all full. We're already building that power, and we are creating those relationships with our legislators. We also have a really cool program called Legislative District Leads. And those are folks, maybe 1 or 2, 3 people from each legislative district who are kind of the liaisons between the Resident Action Project and the Housing Alliance. They're folks that are kind of taking the charge, setting up these meetings, reaching out to the legislators, setting up little coffee chats, maybe a Zoom meeting, in person, whatever it might be, but already having these group little sessions within their district to keep these, keep these bills alive and these needs. Let me get some water. Excuse me, thank you. So we're already putting into practice our our organizing. Sorry, the spring allergies are so bad right now. So we're doing that work now. We will continue to build power throughout the summer. And going into fall, one of the things that the Resident Action Project does is we will have a summit every year, sometime late summer, early fall. We will get together on one side of the state or the other. We have a big mountain range in the middle, the Cascade Mountains. So there's the west side of the state and the east side. And we alternate every other year. But we will bring together the Resident Action Project members and as well as continue to bring new members in. And thank you guys for your grades. Sorry about that. And we will have our summit and talk about, okay, in addition to these legislative priorities, are there other things that we should be focusing on? Is there other new emerging issues that should be on our priority list? And we will start to build our legislative agendas, both as Resident Action Project and then also as the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. And we build that power up. We're having monthly meetings. We're already talking about these things, like what else is happening. Or, like I said, with this grants pass ruling that's coming up, that hearing is April 22nd in just 3 weeks. Excuse me. So depending on the outcome of that, we may be, coming up with some different things that we need to rally against or rally for and create those legislative priorities. But the biggest thing right now is, while our legislators are not in session, this is the time where we're really building those relationships and connecting with them, really getting them to know who we are, because we have found that in our storytelling, that is how we humanize these issues. These legislators, they work for us. I think people sometimes forget that, and a lot of our legislators forget that. They work for us. It's our votes that put them there, or it's our votes that take them out. And so, they get handed charts and graphs and, reports all day long. But when they sit in front of somebody and they hear a tragic story, they see somebody's anguish on their face, they see the tears running down their face. Those are the things that humanize these issues, and those are the things that they cannot forget, especially when then they are reminded of us when we are emailing them or we are connecting with them, again, or we see them at Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day, and you're sitting before somebody and you say, remember, I'm the one that talked with you last year, or I'm the one that, I sent you an email and this was your response. So creating those relationships is really our superpower. I've got legislators that I just text. I don't even have to email. I can pick up the phone. I had one just yesterday. We were texting back and forth. It is getting to know them, but more importantly, for them to get to know you, to get to know your story, to get to know what's happening in their district, because they've got so many issues that they're dealing with, and so many different things right now. Even in our federal level, many of our folks are here since Congress is out right now. They're here and they're going to the ribbon cuttings and they're looking at what are the different projects going on in their district that people are going to need funding for on the federal level. So, and when I say Resident Action Project, talking to our legislators, not just our city council, county council, and state, but also our federal. I just saw mine that I saw in DC for Capitol Hill Day last Thursday. I just saw him at an event on Friday. And I saw another one that we were only able to meet with her staff, and I got to see her in person for another event on Friday. And I said, "Oh, I was just there and, at your office." And she's, "Oh, who'd you talk with? And what, tell me exactly what your priorities were that you talked about from the, when you were there with the NLIHC." So getting them to know you and they recognize you and you're standing in a crowd and they're like, "Oh yeah, hi, I see you." That's what we do. And to the point where now people will look at me and they say, "Oh yeah, you were the one, the single mom." I'm known as the moldy lady, not the thing you really want to be known as, but they remember that was my story. The military veteran, single mom who was living in a moldy apartment, whose son ended up in the hospital with mold growing in his esophagus. That's what they remember. And so that's what we do. So go ahead with the next slide. These were some of the budget support items. The Covenant Homeownership Program, we passed this last year, but we needed to make sure we had money to implement this. And this is Covenant Homeownership for our BIPOC community, our Black and Brown sisters and brothers who homeownership has absolutely been, they have not been able to gain that home ownership and build that generational wealth. And so we were able to get $2 million this year into the program so it can start implementing it and start building up this program and get folks into home ownership programs. So that's very exciting. We also had a nonprofit affordable housing insurance study that was done. So we got money put in for that to get that done. Money in for housing assistance for people with mental health or substance use disorders. That was a big push. We also got manufactured housing technical assistance and preservation. There's like my county has, just the city next to me has 36 mobile homes in it, manufactured home parks in it. And so being able to have money put in so that technical assistance can be given to those communities when for Commerce to develop a study regarding the preservation and the sales and how these folks are not given first rights of refusal. They're being, these properties are being sold out from underneath them. And many of these manufactured housing properties are seniors, people with disabilities, and immigrant folks who could not get past background checks in traditional apartments. So this is, really tragic situation and displacing a lot of folks into our community that have nowhere else to go. And then foreclosure prevention for our homeowners who are facing, hiking or, rising property taxes. And can somebody mute, please? And then the last one is youth shelter, a direct appropriation from our capital budget to really help with youth shelters. A lot of our young people there's just not enough places to go, and making sure that we have enough shelter capacity for our young folks. Next slide, please. And again, the Housing Trust Fund, this is the key funding allocation to make sure that our housing developers are able to build these programs. And so that's a big breakdown there of the different earmarks for that money. So with that, next slide. I think we're towards the end. And these are some of the support items. Yeah, we had a child support pass-through. We had the nonprofit affordable housing insurance study that I mentioned before. Extended foster care services to youth that are aging out of foster care. So instead of, okay, you hit 18 and now you're done. No, providing 3 more or 4 more years of assistance so that gives time for young people to get on their feet and have those supportive services to hold them up while they're figuring things out and entering into adulthood. Well, 24 is aging out, yes, but a lot of services end at 18. So having those additional financial supports. And then supporting young adults following inpatient behavioral health treatment, another big one. So we had some really good supportive items that passed through. But again, like I said, the rent stabilization, that was the big one, and that was the big heartache. But just dormant. We're just going to keep saying that.
Elijah, I need your help again. This failed.
Dua Rahima, do you want to mute, please?
Oh.
Hello. Okay.
The curtain fell.
Dua Rahima is our statewide organizer for the Resident Action Project. She and I live on opposite sides of the state. Always good to see her. She is key in helping us to build these relationships with other organizations, as well as reaching out to who else is not in these conversations. So that is really what we're gearing up for. We've got a lot of different things planned over the summer to strengthen our movement and to really engage folks within our membership. I think we currently have somewhere between around 800 people or 1,000 people that are registered with the Resident Action Project. So really engaging them, because maybe they've testified once or they took a call, did a call to action, sent in an email, but really wanted to bring them into the fold, find out what their stories are, what they're working on in their local areas, but really kind of strengthening their advocacy skills, helping them to form their stories, and get them up and running before January of next year. Thank you, Sid. I know I just saw that. What's the next slide, please? So these are just some of the different support items that we were able to pass. Some of these I've already mentioned, so we can go to the next slide.
I think these are the ones that died.
Oh, these are the, yeah. Went dormant. And then these are some of the amazing legislators that came out for our Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day, who just really, I can't thank them enough. Many of them have had lived experience or are renters or just have worked within homeless services. So they come from, a little bit of experience where they know the problem, they know what we're facing. And they have really extended themselves to our efforts and have, locked arms with us and are definite housing champions. And then next slide. And then that's our amazing Housing Alliance team. You'll see Dua Rahima, who was just referring to up in the top left corner. But we have a housing staff, that mighty 9 people in that bottom corner. That's who runs the entire Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. They're absolutely incredible folks. Anytime, day or night, they have just a powerhouse of people, and I love them dearly and cannot thank them enough for all that they do. But the Resident Action Project is the advocacy organization under the Housing Alliance. And so I think of us all as one big family. And, together we are making these changes one by one. So with that, are there any questions? I cannot see the chat, so I can't, I don't know if there's any questions that.
Yeah, we have, I just finished sharing the screen. Okay. I did take note of a few questions. Do you have time for 1 or 2 of them, or?
Oh, yeah. No, I just saw Mrs. B's, how we are engaging folks to get out the vote. Absolutely. That is one of the 3 pillars of the Resident Action Project is civic engagement. So a lot of our groups all around the state are hosting voter registration tables at different events. Could be a farmer's market, could be a local festival or fair. We are doing certainly during Affordable Homes Week coming up that the NLIHC, I'm sure if you're signed up, you will hear about some of these things. But we are doing civic engagement everywhere we can. and host lots of voter registration or forums. If there's local races, we will do forums. We've done lots of those in the different areas. But we definitely educate folks to help them to understand why their vote matters. And that like I said earlier, our vote is our power. That is how we get housing champions in. And that is how we get folks who are anti-housing, anti-homeless, advocacy out. And so it's one of the first things we talk about is making sure you're registered to vote. And we do a lot of educational, webinars, lunch and learn sessions to help understand why that matters, but also and then we will go further to understand who are the housing champions. Here's how they voted. Here's their voting record. These are the folks in local areas. This is, maybe a local race in a city that is on the other side of the mountains, but we all need to, support. So we do a lot of that. How do we keep folks involved in fighting for their housing? Like I said, this is a relay. So sometimes folks are in the throes of trying to keep the roof over their own head, and they can't get into they can't step up as much as they want, but that's where we rally against. But really utilizing those stories. It's those personal stories. We teach storytelling. We teach how to craft your story, how to do a 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute story, depending on how much time you have to tell that story, whether you're at a city council, county council, state legislature. Really using that story and helping folks to understand that is the power that you have in helping to educate a lawmaker so that they will then represent you and vote according to how we need to pass our different priorities. We post our stories. We use social media a lot to our advantage to get some of these stories out. And so the Housing Alliance has been really good about taking some of these stories and highlighting them and, crafting them, whittling them down, but using those stories to get them out to folks. And to definitely call on our lawmakers to, help with those different situations. Sid, did you have a couple of those questions that I didn't mention?
Yeah, there was a few, so I don't know how many you have time for, but I know one of the first questions that came in was just rebumped right now, but it came from Beck I think earlier when you were talking about like the stakeholders that you work for, they were just interested in knowing more about what makes a progressive landlord.
Progressive landlord, like for instance, in my county, one of our partners is the YWCA, and they have a landlord engagement program. And so a progressive landlord to me is a landlord that understands that they can, have plenty of money in operations and maintenance of their complex. They can still do repairs and upgrades and make a profit at, 5% increase. But they're not going out there and trying to economically evict people by raising the rent in these exorbitant amounts that people cannot afford. A progressive landlord is somebody also who it takes Section 8, doesn't, is part of this solution, not the problem. They're engaged with their tenants. They understand tenant organizing, and they're not afraid of that. They're not retaliating against their tenants. They're keeping their properties well maintained. All of those things that we desire as tenants. So, a lot of our landlords that we have that are working with us, they're on our weekly calls during session and then the monthly calls or so, working with the Housing Alliance, having meetings to educate. Okay, well, this is as a landlord, this is what we have to face, or this is what our insurance rate is. Like they're part of the conversation. They're not at all trying to oppose and keep our they're interested in keeping tenants in place and want to be part of the solution.
Thanks, Mindy.
Yeah. Was there other questions?
And then Beck just followed up saying, so they're doing
Yeah.
what landlords should all be doing. I did have one more question that actually came in before the webinar itself. Somebody asked a question in their registration, but it was kind of centered around like the right to counsel movement and any like existing racial inequities that exist in that movement. And I was just wondering, as somebody who has like played a big part in trying to pass it in your state, like what you have witnessed and like what your thoughts are on around that. And I also invite the person who asked that question to speak up if you'd like.
Yeah, would the author of the question like to ask it?
Absolutely. Hello, my dear. This is Zella Knight.
I was going to say, I don't even need you to tell me who it is because I already know that voice.
So I have been reviewing the data from your Office of Civil Legal Aid and other legal service programs in Washington State, along with the Legal Service Corporation data regarding justice gaps. We continue, despite the investments, see a trend in regards to racial inequities, both from the perspective of the tribal group, which is a large portion of your demographic in your area, to Black folks also. This, we can drill down to disabled, et cetera, but 92% of folk are still not getting legal services. So the question is, what strategies would you recommend to address that element?
Yeah, so I know so for folks who are not aware, Washington State, through a lot of the advocacy of the Resident Action Project, we were the first full state in the country to get right to counsel passed in the country. So for low-income folks that are facing legal filings against them, they are automatically have right to legal counsel. You know, the landlords show up at legal counsel. This happened to me. I didn't have anybody. I didn't have the money. I couldn't defend myself. So when we passed that, we recognized that there was far more people who were in need of these services, to your point, Zella, that were more, people of Black, brown, and other people of color and our Native brothers and sisters that were disproportionately being affected by evictions and homelessness and harassment and all of that, discrimination across the board. And so we did get more money in just for that this past year. But working with civil legal aid organizations is one of the big things that the Housing Alliance and Resident Action Project is doing. We're having meetings with folks all the time to better understand what are the barriers. I was also part of a statewide group that worked with Commerce and a couple of the legislators to talk about these kinds of issues and to recognize that one of the things that was happening was the smaller organizations that were for us organizations, so organizations that specifically work with Black and brown and other people of color, who they themselves are part of those communities, but they were competing for funding, or did not have access to these different kinds of services because they didn't have capacity, or they didn't have the knowledge, they didn't have the technical assistance. So one of the things that we worked with Commerce to understand was having specific training for these kinds of organizations, but also funding that was specific for these organizations. So that is one thing that is happening now. Yeah, there's lots of cities that have right to counsel, but we were the first state to have it statewide. But outreach is the thing that we are doing. And so the Housing Alliance, we have
with no worries.
road.
Brought to you by ADT.
Somebody else needs to mute, please. Thank you. We are doing very specific outreach to these communities to create those relationships. Of course, there's going to be mistrust and all of that, but really utilizing the resident action project members who is working with different organizations or part of organizations that can introduce the Housing Alliance to these organizations, so we can start to work together in building that trust, but also within our board membership. We are very much seeking folks who are part of very specific populations and communities that we've not had relationship with, and bringing, kind of a multi-point way in which we are introducing ourselves if they are not familiar, creating relationship, working with and talking with, how do we support you? What do you need? How do we support you? And then connecting with our civil legal aid organizations to create those programs and processes that will better support our BIPOC tenants and those that are in need of those services. Did that answer?
Not quite, but we'll have a later conversation on that.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. We do have a few hands raised, and we have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
I do have like some really good announcements, or I guess like updates that I want to make. So I'll just ask folks if you want to hear about any legislative updates or any updates regarding tenant engagement with the coalition, to just stay back a few minutes.
Okay.
But I'll hand it to Teresa and Mrs. B, and then for each person, I think there's also Ian. I don't know who that is, but you all have like 1 minute for your question, please.
Yes, hi. I was just wondering why all over the place they're creating new social housing when we already have housing. Why don't they just get rid of, create a new public housing instead of just keep on all the money they putting and investing in new housing? A lot of places have housing that in good condition. So why not use the money for the already houses? Every house is not, and to be what we call demolished and disposed. So why not use the money? The other thing is that you say you have these money. So like, how do people get access to the money that you said that they got, the $60 million? What is that money? Is that money allowed to be used? I'm in New York. Is those some of those monies eligible for New York issues that we have here in New York?
No. That's just Washington State Legislature.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Just Washington State. You would have your own legislature and your own different pots of money for your own state.
Okay, so what about the first question I asked you about? Why they keep on creating new social housing? We already have housing. Why they just don't keep what we have? And that's what I'm saying.
I think you were kind of going in out a little bit. So you're asking, why are we not creating more new social housing?
No. Why are we creating new social housing? We already have housing. Just fix what we already have instead of creating new ones and fix up the ones here.
I can't speak to New York, but in Washington State, we are 1.1 million houses short over the next 20 years. And half of those need to be for the lowest income, extremely low income folks. So we have lots of different needs, and each state's going to have different needs. So there's just a housing shortage everywhere, but we are desperate need for extremely low housing for most extremely low income earners. And so we're really focused on prevention, number one, so the rent stabilization, but as well as we really need to have more permanent supportive housing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then vouchers. We need more vouchers all over. Rental assistance.
Okay.
We'll do Mrs. B and then Ian. Oh. Mrs. B,
Brown.
I don't know where you went. We lost you.
What's her question in the?
She had a few questions in the chat too, so I don't know if there was one in specific she wanted to touch on, but in the meantime, Ian, if you wanted to ask.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, hello to everybody, and bless everybody. And this is like my first time, coming together with you guys. So I really appreciate it. And it's definitely, I love this. So, um, and, and my heart goes out to Washington State and with the, permanent housing, progressive housing, and all of these things. I don't know, I came in late. I was trying to get in, but I came in late. So I didn't know if you guys talked about like elderly and housing. And I know somebody that told me something several days ago about we all need to probably read our constitutional rights, and the amendments and things of this nature, and get really, really familiar with everything across the board on our constitutional rights. But I have a heart for everybody, but I got a special heart for elderly in need. So, if you have any info or a link to where I can get with you guys and become a member or whatever, what have you, however you do it, that would be awesome. And I appreciate everybody's comments, and I appreciate you guys leading the Zoom. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Are you in Washington State?
No, I'm in Kansas City, Missouri.
Oh, okay. Well, Resident
sorry.
Action Project is just for folks in Washington State, but I would definitely recommend that you sign up for the National Low Income Housing Coalition if you haven't already. I imagine you have, which is why you're here. But resident-led organizations, there's several all around the country. But you can put you can put my contact information in the chat for folks. If they've got questions, they are free to email me. Oh, Mrs. Brown is muted.
Yeah, I'm trying. It says she should be able to. I'm so sorry, Mrs. B. I'm not sure.
Can you guys still hear me? This is Ian.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the recommendations and everybody for I hope we all get what we need, and everybody have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
Sorry about that, Mrs. B. Are you able to unmute now? Sorry about that, Mrs. B. I'm not sure what happened there, but I promise it wasn't intentional. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and give like the last updates, and we're gonna hope that we're able to get Mrs. B back. But Mrs. B, if you can leave and come back, we'll try to get you on here. But I'll go ahead and give the last minute updates for folks. For those that are still here, thank you for hanging out for a second. But we just have a few closing remarks for today, and the first one being okay, so we're still accepting feedback for yes, that's perfect. Thank you, Mrs. B. We're still having the form open to receive feedback for Tenant Talk Live. So if there's any topics that you guys want to see, and I know there's a lot of different things that y'all mentioned in the comments, so please fill out that form because it'll really help inform the next few topics for the remainder of the year. So from July through December. And that'll be open through the end of the week. We extended it another week. So please fill that out with the topics that you all want to see. We'll be dropping that in the chat momentarily. It'll be a Google form. I think my colleague had to hop off. Oh, no, there you go. Thank you, Courtney. Awesome. And then we're also starting recruitment process for the next collective cohort. And for folks who aren't aware what the collective is, it is a group of tenant advocates and community leaders with lived experience of housing insecurity who work towards housing justice and racial equity in their neighborhoods and the greater communities, and also at the federal level. And we also at the coalition work really closely with this group to make sure that our policy priorities reflect the needs of low-income households. So if you want to be a part of that, you can fill out our interest form and we'll send you more information in the application once we have the application set up. And then, do we have Mrs. B back?
Yes, she just said she's back.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Mrs. B. You should be able to unmute now.
Yes, Zella, more residents to run for office and commissions. Mrs. B, I see that your mic says it's still muted.
Yeah, I'm like trying to ask to unmute. There we go. Oh, it worked.
So, all right.
There we go.
Thank you so much. I forgot the questions I put in the chat, but one of them was to remind the residents or train the residents to run for political office or make sure they support somebody
Yes.
who has lived experience, who wants to run for office. But my concern was for the elderly, frail, the disabled. What in terms of policies has your agency created or going to create for the disabled, for reasonable accommodations for folks who are suffering with barriers? Because it seems that the accessibility piece throughout the nation is not on at the top of anybody's agenda. And what is your agency doing for the formerly incarcerated people who come out and need housing? Where do they stand? And is your city or your state a sanctuary state? And if so, are the migrants who are there now, how is it affecting those folks who are on the wait list? And that's all I'll ask at this time. Thank you.
Well, that was a lot. Okay. So we're not an agency. We are just a group. We're not even a nonprofit. We're just a statewide organization under the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, which is a 501c3. But the Housing Alliance also has a C4. So they do have a housing action fund side. So many of us, just like Run, yes. So Zella Knight is in California, and her organization is the Resident United Network, and we are their sister organization. So yes, they are a fiscal sponsor, Tiffany. Yes, and so we definitely get behind our candidates that are housing champions. We have folks with lived experience who are running, as well as who are on the Housing Action Board, and who they decide who we are going to endorse, who are housing champions. They do the interviews, the questionnaires, all of that. And then we get behind them. And so we have 3 or 4 former Housing Alliance board members that are now in our state legislature. We have several that are on all kinds of different local levels. And we get behind and help to fundraise for them, door knock, doorbell, or phone bank, all of that. And like I said, Dua Rahima, she does a lot of that as well with the Resident Action Project as our statewide organizer. So we are very engaged with that. As for our elderly, we are also working, always trying to connect with other organizations. So I myself have been working with a group of folks that are in a senior housing facility. I'm working with 2 others in my local area. We are non-political as a 501c3 or C4 and C3, but we are specifically looking for housing champions. And so whichever side that might fall on, but oftentimes it does not fall on the conservative Republican side, I'll just say.
Yeah.
But if they're a housing champion whose values align with ours and who believe that housing is a basic necessity and need, then yeah, we're all behind them. And we work with all kinds of folks.
I apologize for my misnomer in calling your organization an agency.
That's okay.
Spoke, but my concern was the formerly incarcerated.
So
How
we
is
work
the organization promoting shelter for the formerly incarcerated?
Well, we're actually looking to more so for housing for formerly incarcerated. We have been very much behind ban the box, so not trying to get that question on rental applications of have you been formerly incarcerated banned. We've not yet been able to get it across the finish line, but we are definitely working towards that. We have formerly incarcerated people in our legislature who we are, many of us are connected with and working with on different pieces of legislature outside of housing, but also within housing. So we have folks that are in, we've got groups within our Resident Action Project that work with formerly incarcerated folks, and even Dua Rahima can speak to that as well. She was part of the panel in DC during the Housing Forum about different things, I'm getting flustered now. Different people that have had different barriers. And so we are very much in support of any legislation that removes those barriers for people who have those, have been firmly incarcerated, getting those barriers removed, because the last thing we want is to perpetuate recidivism. And we understand that in order for somebody to be able to move forward, they've got to have that roof over their head. So we are very much engaged with organizations that work with those who have been previously incarcerated.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your efforts and the work that your organization is doing. And you're providing a lot of information for all of us. And Sid, thank you again for your courtesy and allowing me to reconnect. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mrs. B.
Thank you, Mrs. B.
You're welcome. Thank you both.
And thank you, Mindy, again for joining us. I know we went over by a lot more than I promised, so I apologize, but thank you everybody for being
One
here.
last thing, Mrs. B, she asked if we were a sanctuary state. Yes, we are. And also we have, and I don't know about statewide, but like in my county alone, we have a whole resettlement program for our Afghan refugees, for Ukrainian. We're also working with another group with, let's see, we've got Afghan, Ukrainian, we've got multiple organizations that we are bringing in new, yes, Linda, new Americans, bringing in folks that, are trying to create a better life. And so we are definitely working with organizations that are doing that work as well.
Has the new migrants created an impact for folks who are waiting for housing?
No, because
are they now a priority? Because in some cities, like New York City, the migrant population has become a priority and has bumped people who've been waiting for housing to a lower level. So I was just curious how your state was handling that.
It's different. No, not the same list. We're doing, separate funding streams. Thank you, Carrie. We are working with Africans from the Ukraine. Anyway, no, it's a different housing system, different lists, different funding sources.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes, Linda, no competition. Yes.
Well, thank you again, Mindy. And thank you everybody for joining us. I did have a few more updates, but we'll save them for later. I will post in the chat and I will include in the follow-up just a lot of federal advocacy that's happening right now. But make sure to save the chat if you want to see those, but we'll send them out on Friday as well. Again, thank you everybody for being here, and we'll see you on May 6th for our next Tenant Talk Live.
Sid, if there's anyone on the call who is not a member of the coalition, please join.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. And if you want to see folks afterwards or follow any updates, feel free to join our Facebook page as well so that you can see what's going on. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Take care.
Right.
Much. Thank you, Mindy. I really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
Good night.
thank
Peace
you.
and blessing, everyone. Have a good night.